Good morning, all. We're very, very excited to be here this morning, despite the time. We've got our favorite beverage. Hopefully you've had a moment to be able to do that as well. Welcome to our spring program for parents and guardians of 9th and 10th graders. We're excited to have with us today a wonderful panel of both graduating seniors and parents and guardians of graduating seniors. Seniors will be completing their Berkeley Carroll experience in just a few days. So pretty timely event for us, and I think for the families and the students as well. If I haven't met you already, I'm Carolyn Middleton. I'm the Director of College Counseling. I'm going to let my panelists and co-conspirators introduce themselves. But I wanted to let you know that we will be sending as a follow-up after today's webinar a link to this recording. So if you've got other family members or other parents and guardians that you know that may have missed this, we will send out a recording after the event. We'll also send out an overview, kind of a 4-year calendar of what to expect in terms of your interactions with the college office and how the process will work over the course of the 4 years. We'll send last semester's coffee recording, so in case you missed the fall recording, or the fall event that we held, we usually will do this event every semester. So we think of it as more of a developmental curriculum. But if you want the opportunity to review that recording, if you weren't able to join us for that, we'll send that out after. And then I noticed just in the past couple of days, talking to students and families, that they missed our summer opportunities and school year enrichment guide. So we're going to send a copy of that out, a link to everyone as well. Some of the deadlines may have passed for summer programs, but it's a pretty comprehensive, I think 18-page guide or something like that. So we want to send those materials out to you, and then anything that comes up today, we'll send that as a follow-up to you all. So with that, I am going to turn this event over to my colleagues, Ms. Chen and Mr. Almonte, with special thanks also to Ms. Dunn, who's helping us to run, or is running, I should say, this webinar today. So I'll step back and let my colleagues coordinate today's panel. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thank you all again for joining us this morning. I am Joelle Chen. I'm one of the Associate Directors of College Counseling, and I'll let Mr. Almonte introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Almonte. I'm also an Associate Director of College Counseling, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you this morning.
Amazing. So before we get into it, I also want to introduce our panelists, or allow them to introduce themselves. So panelists, I will call on you if you can just say your name, and if you're a parent or a student, obviously there might be some assumptions made there, but we want to make it clear for all of those who are watching who everyone is. So Allison, if you don't mind unmuting and introducing yourself.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. I am Allison Maroney, and sadly, I'm not a student. I am actually a parent of a senior. I mean, you might guess I'm a student, but it's okay. And my son Jackson is in the class with Ella and Julia, and I'm excited to talk with you about our experience.
Thanks, Allison. Marjan, if you would like to go.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Marjan van der Weijden. I'm the mother of Eva Vandenberg, who is a senior this year, and also the mother of Hein Vandenberg, who was a senior last year. So very, very happy to be here. Thank you.
And you're finally done. Both are seniors. Both are done.
But I have another one who is actually going to high school. So next year I'm in these meetings again as a listening parent.
So close, but so far. Yeah. Julia, if you'd like to go.
Hi, I'm Julia Balin. I'm a student and I'm in the 12th grade. Yeah.
And Ella.
Hi, I'm Ella and I'm a senior.
Awesome. And you are all in your last week of courses. So thank you also for the students for joining us. So what we wanted to do with this panel today is kind of talk through the process a little bit. And instead of just hearing from the counseling team, hear from the students and the parents that just went through this process pretty recently. And so we want to take it back actually and start with the process of visiting colleges. And so for 9th and 10th grade families, you might not be visiting colleges. It might not be a priority, and that's okay. But thinking back to when you all were visiting colleges, what were some of the key things that you all did or you were observing on your college visits? When did you start your college visits? So if you want to use the raise hand function, and then I'll call on you to unmute. So that way we don't speak on top of each other. Oop, I muted myself. Allison, go for it.
Thank you. I think the first time we started looking at colleges, the first visits we did were spring break of junior year. And we sort of did that was our target for all of spring break during 11th grade were visits. And Jackson was interested in looking abroad. So we did a trip abroad to see some spaces. But we didn't spend the whole time doing that. But and then also into the summer of junior year, between junior and senior year, or when we saw the schools in the US. I think one of the keys that a piece of advice that I heard, and it might have been from Miss Middleton, but a piece of advice that I heard before going to these visits were kind of step back as a parent and let the child lead it. I did do that. I stayed in the back and I was pretty quiet and I just sort of watched and took it all in. And I let Jackson ask questions if he wanted to, but I certainly didn't say he should ask anything. And then sometimes we would leave the tour and Jack would say, gosh, those parents asked a lot of questions. And I was like, all right, pat myself on the back. So one of the things that I sort of learned from that was I wanted it to be Jackson's experience. I wanted to lead from his experience and what he was looking for, because the questions he would ask may not have been something I thought of. And my questions were not really something that he was really thinking about or wanting to know. So I think that was my biggest piece of advice that I would pass on. But really sort of junior year into senior year were when we did our visits.
Thanks, Allison. Does anyone else have any memories? I know it's been some time since visiting colleges, but any memories or perspectives that they wish to share about the college visit process? Go for it, Julia.
I just wanted to say, like, when I first started visiting colleges, it was around like April of junior year, so around the same sort of time. And I personally just didn't really know what I wanted at all. So I think it was really good that me and my family took a trip we went to Boston, we went to the Midwest, but it also took us a while to kind of like hit a bunch of different places. And just like adding on to what Miss Maroney said, like, I definitely think it was super helpful having my parents kind of like step back from that and allowing me to kind of see what I liked. Because I felt as though a lot of it was sort of based on feel and how I felt within the space. So yeah, I have a lot of like fun memories from visiting colleges because it was a fun thing to do with my parents and to kind of talk afterwards and see what I liked and finally get their kind of thoughts. So.
Thanks, Maria.
Yeah, definitely, Julia, I agree. It's also a really good time to just be out on the road together. And when you do these visits, it's really good time to sort of then deliberate and talk and really get to get a better understanding. I think on some of those trips, and I don't think we overdid it, but they were very valuable, both for Henk, my husband, when he did them, or sometimes I did them. And then we all came back with lots of perspective. So I think that was the time spent just not even at the colleges, but the time spent together to talk about what's important to them. And also, I think I always said to both Hein and Eva, keep an open mind. There's still a lot changing in your last 2 years. You might think about things differently. So just go with the flow and don't assume you know what you want. And yeah, I think their perspective also changed over time. So I think taking the time to let something happen organically in terms of where they're going to end up and land, I think has been super helpful for us.
Thank you. Ella.
Yeah, I just have a little tip that I started doing on tours, and it ended up helping me for my essays much later in the process. But I started taking notes on little details that I wouldn't be able to find on the website. For example, I'm going to Barnard, and when I was touring Barnard, I actually wrote down a little quote that a tour guide said that I thought it was really inspiring. And then I ended up quoting that in my essay. So obviously you don't have to write super vigorously the whole time, but it can be helpful to write little things down because it will really help in the essays.
That's a really good piece of advice. Lawrence, thank you for joining us. I want to allow for our other student panelists to introduce himself. So Lawrence, if you are able to unmute and just introduce yourself and if there's anything else that you want the audience to know about you.
I'm Lawrence. Nice to meet you all. The bus was running a bit late, sorry. I love science, especially psychology and computer science. And next year I'll be going to Brown University, so that's really exciting. And yeah, I'm really excited to answer some questions.
Thanks, Lawrence. And Ella, you said where you're going. Julia, if you'd like to say where you're going during this panel.
Yeah, I'm going to the University of Richmond.
Go Spiders.
Yes.
And just to kind of piggyback off of what Ella was saying, so if there's any confusion, when you're applying to colleges in the future, certain colleges will ask specific questions that you have to answer for their application. So they're mini essays called supplements. So what Ella was describing was taking notes to be able to refer back to them, to be able to craft that short essay for that college or university, which is a very, very helpful tip. So I'm very happy you were able to share that with the audience, Ella. So keeping on this theme of visits, you know, going to visit a college or university, I think you really get a different type of perspective. So my question for the audience is, you know, and finding the fit. That's a real big thing that we say in our college office, is that it's a fit that you're looking for. What were general criteria or types of details that you were looking for, paying attention to in terms of your college visits that were really important as you navigated your college search process, or as your child navigated their college search process? Hello?
Yeah, I think Julia started talking about this, but I feel like a really big thing is just the feel, and it's something that can't really be named, and it's just something that you have to go and you have to see if you can see yourself there. And I think that also has to do with the students. I feel like the tours that I went on when classes were happening, which is kind of hard because the students aren't there right now, but if you can go right when they go back to classes, just seeing what the students are like, I think just seeing if you could see yourself there is a big thing.
And to add on to that, I remember there were a lot of times where I was researching a college online, and I would like look at pictures like, oh, this is a beautiful campus. I really think I could live here. And then I'd go visit it, and just like I wasn't feeling some of the vibe, or I'd learn something about myself, or like, oh, I'm from New York. I'm so used to the city. Maybe like a more rural environment isn't for me, even though it looks very nice. And so I feel like you learn by visiting colleges, even if it's not like your top colleges, you learn more about yourself. And that helps you like really define like what you want to get from in a college environment.
So, Julia?
I mentioned this earlier, but I really didn't know kind of what I wanted going into the college process. I kind of had a sense of what I wanted to do, like academically, or not even, but like what was more so the mystery for me was what the school was going to feel like. So as I went on the tours, it became more clear to me, like kind of the size, location, that type of stuff that I wanted. But adding on to what Ella and Lawrence said, there was a school that I felt like kind of, I feel like I say this a lot with my friends, but like checked all the boxes for me. And then when I went and visited, again, it just wasn't for me. Whereas when I found the school that I'm going to, I felt like, okay, this kind of makes sense for me. And I felt like making the trip was very much worth it, because in the end, I could feel that it just felt right. So I think you can kind of have an idea of what you want, like the location to be, size, sense of community, diversity, all that type of stuff. But you really do have to kind of see what it feels like once you're there.
Can I add one more thing? It has been interesting because Eva actually goes to a university that she hasn't visited. So sometimes you think you know your ways and you know what you're planning for, and then your acceptances come back. She did. I mean, and Miss Chen knows this, right? She actually she's going to Trinity College in Dublin. And I think with so much time spent researching colleges, actually that wasn't the school she researched a lot. And then once she got her offer back, she dove into it and gradually it started to tick all her boxes. So yes, she's taking a risk. She hasn't been there, but at the same time, we all agree it's the right decision for her now. So I think keeping an open mind is really important. It's sometimes the result is different than what you think it might be.
So actually, that is a perfect transition. Thinking about the students here and the families here who are looking outside of the US at colleges and at universities, maybe you weren't able to visit all of them. What was that process like? How did it differ from applying to maybe some of the US universities that you or your student applied to? Yeah, Maria.
Yeah, I can kick off with that because both Hein and Eva have gone abroad. We are originally Dutch, but the children grew most of their childhood in the UK, and both Hein and Eva expressed the desire to go back and study in Europe. Both were, well, Hein was pretty sure he wanted to go to Holland, but we still went to a lot of colleges in the US. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he comes back here, but ultimately he went to the Netherlands. And Eva also was doing a lot of work in the UK. And I think I'll have to be honest, it's a lot of work it's a lot of things to think about when you apply in different countries, because the systems are different, the requirements are different. So I think, it is extra work. So I think taking the time to sort of work with the college advisor, Ms. Chen, has been super instrumental and really helpful for Eva, who is actually very proactive herself, but in finding the roadmap through that. So I think that's it's definitely extra work, but at the same time, I think it's been super fun as well, because in some instances we have been looking at colleges and places. So it's all doable because both of them have ended in a place that are totally suitable for them, and although they're both very different. Yeah. I can add more, but I don't want to. I'll just leave it there for now.
Thank you, Allison.
I mean, I'll echo what you just said. It is a little extra work because it's not part of the Common App. Jack is going to go to Edinburgh in Scotland, and so it's part of the UCAS system. And so it was a different application process. It was all a little bit different. And so there were questions for Ms. Middleton that we had to ask along the way. And so he had additional pieces that he had to submit that he perhaps didn't need to submit for US schools. So there were extra pieces. We did visit Edinburgh before he applied, and that was part of our spring break trip. And then there were some other schools in other countries that he didn't see before he applied. He liked the research that he did online. And we decided if it was one of the finalists that if he was offered a spot, then we would go see them. But when Edinburgh came back, we didn't have to. So I think it's an interesting thing not interesting. I think it is interesting. It's an interesting experience. It's a different way to think about it because they have different processes, and some of the schools will actually have you choose a major when you're applying. So that's something to remember. And Jackson knew or had a very good sense of what he wanted in terms of a major. So some schools will ask you to apply to a specific school within the university. So that was something that we learned. We didn't know that was how that worked. And it worked out for him because he knew what he wanted to do. And then there were some schools that we learned are 3-year programs because they're in other countries and they don't have 4-year programs. They have 3. So that was something to consider too. He seemed pretty excited about that, although Edinburgh now is 4 years. So sorry. So I think it's I don't think you have to go see all the schools, especially if you're looking abroad, because that could get really expensive. But I think looking at the websites and talking to people who either have experience going to those schools or talk to your college counselor about their experience visiting the schools, because I know they visited a lot of these schools as well. And that might give you a sense too before applying and starting through that process. But I think it was a really important piece for us to add in as another option to the US schools. And it ended up really working out.
Thanks, Maria.
Yeah, I think one thing that we were quite worried about is that when the international schools are asking either for AP exams or IB, and when we moved to the US, I think we were just looking for the best school for the children, and then maybe naively weren't looking too far ahead. And we've been super happy with the choice of school. But when it came to colleges, we got a little bit worried. But at the same time, I think we've also learned, particularly through Ava's experience, who was looking at more options than Hein did, that even if it says something on the website, it doesn't mean that you can't get through, right? So you just write to them, you contact them, and she's got some fabulous offers. So I think I would say if you want to sort of look at APs in addition to, but I wouldn't say that's, I think we've been super happy where Hein and Ava have landed without their APs, and maybe it's limited their choice a little bit, but at the same time, they've also got more opportunities, I think, than we thought they would have, simply because I think, Ms. Chen, we've sort of, some of those are not as fixed and firm as you think they are, or as they look like on their websites. So don't take no for first answer, for sure.
Thank you for bringing that up. So a lot of international, not a lot, there are some international schools that do require AP exams or SAT subject tests, which no longer exist. But exactly, we work with students and families, and we have done a lot of research to find schools that don't require them, so that students don't have to do extra tests that, quite frankly, the Berkeley Carroll curriculum does not align with, and still have, to your point, Maria, at the end of the day, options to consider. I'll pass it off to Louis.
So thinking about the application, so the application as a whole is, a large picture of who the student is. It incorporates their transcript, standardized testing, if applicable, letters of recommendation, extracurricular activities, and then some personal writing that's included that allows the person reading the application to get to know the student better. So in thinking about, standardized testing and how things have changed in recent years, can you all talk about which tests you started to pursue, or if you decided to apply test optional, and kind of navigating this new terrain that we're in terms of standardized testing, or how your student navigated this process in terms of how you decided to apply to college, either with or without testing, and if with testing, how did you know which test to pursue? Ella?
Yeah, so I submitted my test scores to, I think, every school that I applied to. I took the ACT, and the way that I chose which test to take was just, I did the practice tests for both the SAT and the ACT, and then I just got a higher score in the ACT. So that's the route that I went with. And it was a long process that was challenging at times, because there was this point where at the end of my junior year, I got a score that I was happy with, and it was like the exact goal that I wanted, but I still felt like I could take the test again and get a higher score. But I knew that also meant taking a test senior fall, which is a very busy time. And actually, like, my parents and everyone didn't think that I should take it again, but I ended up taking it again. And I'm really happy that I did, because I got a score that I never thought I could get. And I do think it helped my results. So it is a challenging thing, but yeah, that's what I did.
Perfect. Julia?
Yeah, I took the 2 different practice tests through Berkeley Carroll, and I ended up scoring higher on the SAT. So I studied to take the SAT. I worked with 2 different tutors, and then I took it once, and then I switched tutoring. It was very weird. I'm also the oldest in my family, so I'm the first sibling to kind of navigate that process. But I definitely felt like the second tutor worked better for me. I think it's kind of just about trying different things out, which I think is really important, and being patient, because it can be a very long, frustrating process. But I took the test once, and then I took it again. I ended up improving a lot on my second time, but I didn't do well enough to submit to a lot of my schools. And I don't think I submitted to basically any schools, even though I felt personally very satisfied with my score, and I was proud of myself for how I did. And And then me and my parents just kind of decided, you know what, like, that's it for you. I think it's like good to know what works for you. I'm glad that I did take it, because I don't know, I think it's good to see. And I kind of wanted to take it a third time. But I also am glad that my parents were just kind of like, enough is enough. You improved a lot. We're proud of you. I was proud of myself. So yeah, it's definitely not required depending on your personal situation.
The team knows I have to drop off, but I just want to say if anyone wants to talk more about our experience that we had with applying abroad or any application, I'll be more than happy to be contacted by anyone. Yeah, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Lawrence?
Yeah, I also took the SAT. Like Julia, I like took the practice tests like through Berkeley Carroll, and I actually got a similar score on the SAT and the ACT, but I like while taking the ACT, I felt really, really exhausted. So I felt like I'm gonna have a better time taking the SAT. And that's just like how it worked for me. I know it's different for other people. And my experience with it was that I took it twice. The first time I got a score that I was happy with, but I knew that I could possibly have a better score. And then I studied a bunch. I was weaker in math, so I studied a lot of math, and I took it again. I had a higher math score the second time, but it was the same. But like I reached a point where I was sort of like satisfied with my improvement, but at the same, even though my total score didn't really change, and I was ready to move on. And I think an important part of like testing is like knowing when you're satisfied with your improvement, when you're satisfied with your score, because like that number does not represent you. And like there's always like there feels like a numbers game to like who can have the highest number, like if you just like study more, but sometimes it's just, well, in my opinion, it just wasn't worth my time and energy at that point, and I'm glad I made my decision.
I'll just echo what the students have said. In watching Jackson go through it, he did the practice test as well through Berkeley Carroll. And similar to Lawrence, he scored similarly on the ACT and the SAT, and ultimately went with ACT on the advice of Compass Prep. And based on the pacing of the ACT, he just felt more comfortable with it. So we ended up focusing on that. He also worked with, like Julia, 2 different tutors. The first one ended up not being a good match, and the second one I think worked out much better, and they sort of got each other. And he took it a couple of times and felt good with it. And we were happy to be like, that's enough. If you're good with it, we're good with it. It's only a piece of your application. And so we didn't want to make it the focus of the application. We didn't want it to become a big stressor. And when he was happy with the score, we were happy to back out. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the international schools do require it. So we did do it because he wanted to have that avenue. And he ended up submitting it, I think, to every application because he was proud of his score. And so we just rolled with it. But that's our experience with that.
Thanks, Allison. And yes, for international schools, there's been a shift. Some are still test optional, which is great. And some are more likely to take SAT or ACT. So absolutely on the money there. So thinking a little bit more about the application, the transcript is really important. That guides a lot of the decision making for colleges. And so for our families and parents and guardians who are listening, going into 10th and 11th grade, I'm sure they've been thinking a lot about the courses that their students are taking. So could you all talk a little bit about how you approach choosing the courses that you did for 11th and for 12th grade? Again, I know it's been so long. Lawrence, go for it.
For me, it was really about following through on my interests. And I felt like not everyone needs to know what they're interested in by 10th grade in order to make those decisions. But I had things that I was interested in, like I said before, computer science, especially psychology. So that's what I decided to take. And it was just like following through on like, these are like, this is, I didn't really know what career I wanted per se, but I just knew what I liked and I followed through with that. And when it came to transferring that to like my college application, it was really helpful because I was able to write about what I was passionate about and connect that to the classes I took. And but at the same time, like what I'm interested in now isn't the same as what I was interested in like beginning of junior year.
Yeah.
And so like it's always possible to pivot as long as you show that you've always been pursuing your passions and that like you'll continue to that college. I think that's like the most important part.
Great advice there, Lawrence. Julia.
Yeah, I just wanted to like echo what Lauren said, because definitely same for me, following through on my interests. I loved chemistry in 10th grade, so I decided to take advanced chem 2 the next year. But I also think there's kind of like an idea of, you know, moving, like showing, I forget what the word is, but like when you're kind of moving up as you go through high school and kind of like classes get more rigorous and, you know, this and that. And I think that like I definitely had that thought in the back of my mind about my classes being more rigorous, but I think sort of through that I was able to find kind of my place in like the classes that I was taking. So for instance, with the college process in mind, but also just where I was at the time, I moved up in like my math level, which didn't feel stressful because I wasn't doing it so that I could have like advance on my transcripts. I was doing it because it felt right. So I think definitely like listening to what feels right, and as Lauren said, doing what you're interested in, but also like staying true to your interests in that regard are really important. And also like advancing in classes that feel right and not just like to advance.
All right. Well, I will pass it back to Mr. Almonte.
So some of you, or either you or your child throughout this process, were looking to pursue the arts. So if you applied for an art major, whether that's film, acting, art, studio art, anything of that nature, can you talk a bit about how you navigated that process, or how that process was a bit different from a traditional application process? Ella?
Yeah, so I applied for acting programs. I want to pursue acting after high school. And I was kind of at a place where I didn't know if I wanted to do a BFA program, which is kind of a more rigorous program for acting. It's kind of a conservatory where you're mostly just doing acting all day, every day, or a BA program, which is a little less intense, where you're still doing classes, acting classes, but also a lot of academic classes. And at the beginning of the process, I really thought that it was kind of BFA or bust, because that's kind of a common thing that a lot of like people who say to kids who want to be actors is you have to do a BFA and that's the only path. And so at the beginning of the process, I was, okay, I have to do the BFA process. And I ended up applying to a lot of BFA programs. But I ended up touring Barnard, which I never thought that I would apply to, because I always wanted to do a really intensive conservatory. And I also didn't want to stay in New York City. But it ended up being a really good match because it was in the city. So I could still take acting classes and I could do a BA while also pursuing my academic interest. I especially think at a school like Berkeley Carroll, where a love of learning is really cultivated, and I think all students are genuinely care about their classes. I think it can be challenging for a student at Berkeley Carroll to go from that to something like a conservatory, where you're not really like writing essays, and like I love writing, but I mean, maybe it's different for every student. But I just found for me that I wanted to continue my academic pursuits while pursuing my artistic stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. Allison?
I'll step in. Jackson applied to film programs for film production, and he also had the same thinking, Ella, as you in the beginning of his BFA or nothing. And then sort of, I think we did some research, he did some research and figured out that even if he did a BA program, it wasn't that he wasn't going to get to film. It was that there was a wider selection maybe of classes and opportunities that he would be available for. So he did apply to both BFA and BA programs. Part of that process, there is an additional piece. He had portfolio pieces that he needed to submit in addition to his application. For film, there were some short films that he had to submit if he had a short film, a creative resume, sort of listing out all the different projects he'd worked on. They also would accept, depending on the school, different art that he did visually. So he has visual arts through his design program, and different work that he likes to do outside of film. So that was part of the portfolio as well. Some of the programs in the US, I think it was mostly US, had earlier deadlines because of the production program. So you were on a separate deadline or a separate notification date than other programs, mostly because they have to take longer, I think, to review your portfolio, and the faculty step in and are part of that process. So I think just thinking about if that's something that you would want to pursue, thinking about your portfolio, I think it ties into the classes that you take in your junior and senior year, and maybe even the summer work that you do between junior and senior year. And that was when Jack did a lot of his film work, where he worked on, got some really good short films as part of his portfolio. So he wasn't stressing about creating new work in his fall of senior year. So I think planning it out is really key, just because there are the extra parts. You'll still have the essays and you'll still have the supplementals. Internationally, it was very similar. They had a portfolio as well with its own deadline. And I think it took maybe a little longer to hear back because of that. And that's okay. We knew that going in. So I think that gives you some idea of how different it might be.
So thinking of the other pieces still focused on the application, another one that's pretty important is the extracurriculars, the ways that you're involved in either the BC community, your home community, just what you do outside of the classroom. So can you all, for the students and then for a parent of a student, talk about some of the ways that you were able to find places to become engaged, and what were your engagements in high school that you think were really important for this process? Julia.
My engagements were all like very different, I believe. I definitely think the biggest one was probably dance for me, because I've been doing that my whole life, which was actually what I ended up writing my supplement about for the school that I'm going to. So I think that's also interesting. But I also run an affinity group at Berkeley Carroll. I'm on the honor council. I'm on Key Society. I definitely do a lot of different things within the school. But again, all things I'm very much so interested in. Nothing that's just kind of like busy work to slap on an application. I think that's really important. And I think that they can kind of see right through that when you're just doing stuff to do it. So I definitely think not everything has to fit into this like one cohesive narrative, but I think as long as you're doing things that you're passionate about and show kind of the full range of your interests, that's great.
Snaps there, and also great job at the dance concert last week. Ella, go for it.
Yeah, I think something that I tried to do is, as I was progressing to being an upperclassman, like junior and senior year, trying to combine my interests into kind of like small activities. So I am really interested in psychology, and I'm also interested in theater. And then I kind of made the through line. I did this in my essays a little bit, like human nature and how I'm really interested in human behavior. And this is how I'm expressing that in multiple ways. Or I'm also interested in film. So I did an internship at this film production company that specializes in uplifting neurodivergent voices. So kind of tying it back to psychology, I think that can be helpful, is combining interests into specific things. And I'd say also for extracurriculars outside of school, I think can be really helpful to just be proactive and put yourself out there. Like for this production company that I interned at, I just saw a TikTok of theirs and I was like, I think this is really cool. I'm just going to email them and maybe they'll respond and maybe they won't. And they ended up responding and they wanted to get on a Zoom call. And then I also submitted like an essay that I wrote for this magazine, and then I could say that I was a published writer on my Common App just because I emailed this magazine that I found and then they wanted to publish it. So I think that's also
I love that. See, parents, if your students are on TikTok, they're actually finding job opportunities. Exactly. Lawrence.
I want to second part of what Ella said about like combining interests. During my junior year, I was really interested in psychology. I was really interested in computer science. So I decided to do an independent study where I combined the both, where I like did a psychological research paper for one semester, and then I made a game using that the second semester. And it's been really fun so far. And I think it's been like a strong part of my application because it shows that I'm willing to like find my own path in sort of like combining my interests. And I'm not saying everyone needs to like do an independent study, but there are like always be looking for ways that you can like show that like not only are you passionate about like several things, like a wide range of things, you're also passionate about like how they intersect, and like you're creative in thinking of like, okay, this is how this thing works with this thing, and this how this could solve a problem in the real world, and this is how it affects my community. Stuff like that I think shows a lot of impact. And as far as outside of college, it was I said outside of college, outside of school, it was a lot of my extracurriculars were mainly like computer science stuff. And a lot of it was for like sort of community based, like teaching like computer science concepts to like people of color in the community. And I connected that to just like, just one of my general life patterns of just like, I want to give back to the community I came from, and I want to help people like me. And so things like that also help.
Allison.
I'll just add a little bit here, thinking about, because these are families from 9th and 10th grade, I think our audience are. When Jack was in 9th and 10th grade, his idea of extracurriculars were much more wide ranging because he was trying to find his interests. And I think that was really important. And it may not have been all of the things he put on his application, but that I think helped him find where he was really excited, so that once he got to 11th and 12th grade, or towards the end of 10th grade and into 11th grade, he had more of a, I guess he was passionate about certain things, and then he could speak really honestly and openly about that in his application. So I think when he was in that younger years of Berkeley Carroll time, it was, let's try some things out and see how it feels. We'll try it on for size, and that will help inform what we do later on. That is really more who we are, and then we can talk about it and be honest about it. So just a piece of advice.
Another part of the application is for the United States application is a 650 word essay called the personal statement. So students and parents, so students, can you talk about how you navigated picking your topic? And can you let us know how involved your parents were with your college essay? Or did you collaborate? Was it something that you did all on your own? And then for Allison, in terms of the parent perspective, how did you support Jackson as he was thinking of his topic or writing his essay? Lawrence?
For me, I think generally it depends on like the student and the relationship with their parents. I knew that I wanted a lot of like, just like so I didn't show my parents my college essay much until it was like almost done. And that's because I was going through a lot of ideas and I really needed to be in my own space and like really think it through about like how does this sound to me without outside influence for a bit. And then like once I got to a certain point, I started like showing it to my college counselor, and then I showed it to my parents, and they both gave me edits, and it was really helpful. And I think a lot of it is like listen, I guess, as advice for parents, like listen to your child about like how much they want you to be involved. I think that like obviously you should like see it. Like it'd be weird if they just submitted like a maybe like a personal essay that you never saw, but like you don't need to be like fully in the weeds with it unless they want you to, you know?
Julia?
I think I had kind of like an idea of what I was going to write about during the summer after, I guess last summer, so summer after junior year, which is kind of when they tell you to start. But I wasn't too good about scheduling and like really getting down to writing and throwing around ideas and stuff like that. And I think that like I required a lot of help from my mom for that first draft. And I think something that's really interesting that I've heard is like when it's the right topic, it should come pretty easily. And you should be able to kind of write that yourself. So I actually ended up like later on, much closer to November 1st, unfortunately, had to write a sort of different essay with a different topic. But it was a lot easier to write, and it definitely didn't require a lot of help from my mom. I definitely collaborated with her a lot in terms of talking about the idea, like sort of outlining what I was going to talk about, just because I feel like she knows me very well, and I find working with her to be very helpful. But all of that writing was my own, and I think that again, like when you're writing about the right thing that sort of shows you well, it should come very easily to you.
And in terms of the college essay, we always say that for the most part, there's not really like a wrong topic. It's all about how it's executed. But Julie, I think you made a really great point, is that sometimes like you can pivot and really kind of find yourself exploring a different topic, and then they get a better sense of who you are and your experiences and the qualities that you possess as a person. And sometimes it is as simple as finding something that it's easier to talk about. And usually it's a topic that's quite simple. Ella?
Yeah, I think one thing that was really helpful for me for writing my Common App essay was this workshop that Berkeley Carroll does for rising seniors. That's right at the end of junior year. And it was just this like 1-day workshop that every senior was required to do. And they give you these packets with lists of prompts to think about, and someone comes in and kind of gives a little lecture on tips for college essays. And I found that really helpful. And that's how I ended up finding my final topic. Yeah, that was really helpful.
Allison?
I'll just echo from the parent perspective what Lawrence and Julia were saying. I would say that I did take Jackson's lead on it, and if he wanted help, I was there. If he didn't, I wasn't going to push, and then I would ask Miss Middleton the questions on the back end. But it was more about, I would just, when he did want feedback or he did want to discuss it, it was asking him questions to get him thinking, and not really, I wasn't in the weeds with the editing because I wanted it to be his voice. So I think it's really important to take their lead and how much oversight they want or how much help they want. Utilize your college counselor if you don't get a lot of feedback from your child. And then also, you know, just sort of offer the help where needed. But I didn't step in a ton about it because I wanted it to be his own space.
Thank y'all. So as we kind of approach the end of our webinar, I would love to hear, and I think the attendees would really appreciate hearing advice that you have for parents in this process. Just as you reflect on this past year, what you think they should know or be aware of, or advice on helping to navigate their students as they start thinking through the college process. Lawrence.
I really like what Ms. Maroney said about asking questions that prompted thought, because there was like a process, like earlier in the college process, a lot of my parents were asking me like, I guess like questions that didn't really prompt thought, and like it was kind of stressing me out. But I feel like I had a conversation with them, and like I talked to them, I was like, hey, like these kind of questions are stressing me out. And they started changing the way they ask questions about college and the way they talk to me about college, and in ways that allowed me to, I guess, like keep it not like always at like forefront, like like I need to work on this, I need to work on this, but sort of like different ways to think about new perspectives. And I really valued that from my parents. And I guess for parents, my biggest part of advice would be just to listen to your child. Like the decision is ultimately up to them because that's where they're going to be living for the next 4 years. And so they might have like opinions that conflict with yours, and they might have goals that like, oh, you might not really think it's a good fit, but let them work through it. Don't just like put up a wall and stop them. Like you can always like say like, oh, I don't think this is a good idea, but like let them work through it, because it's a process of, it's also a big part of the process is learning who you are and what you want. And so I think your children will be learning a lot about themselves through this process and growing a lot from it.
Thank you, Julia.
I was gonna say, like, if you're oh wait, I just realized I don't think this applies to anyone here. I was gonna say, like, use this summer if you're a junior going into senior year, because I feel like I could have used it more. But in terms of more like advice stuff that I feel like is more meaningful, I really do think everything works out, like genuinely, and happens for the right reasons. I think listen to not just your child, but also the college counselors, because they really do know what they're talking about. The school that I'm going to was a school that I didn't really know much about. I hadn't really done a lot of research on the University of Richmond, and because it kind of wasn't a big name, unfortunately, I don't think I really gave it as much of a shot in the beginning. But what you don't realize is, like, if you're not researching, you don't realize that these schools actually are a big deal and are excellent schools to go to, and people love them. And I could not be happier with where I'm going. I really do feel like it was the right fit, and I definitely think Mr. Almonte had said that from the beginning. And I think that, yeah, just keeping an open mind, and don't get stuck on one thing, because usually the right school will kind of present itself to you in the right time. And every school is a great school. Yeah, it's all about fit. So
Thanks, Julia. Ella.
Yeah, I have two things. One, something that I feel like I wanted to get through my parents' head a little bit more is that the college process is a lot different than it was when you guys were applying to college, in a lot of different ways. And sometimes my parents would be like, well, when I was applying, we didn't have to do X thing, but it is so different, and it's so much more competitive. And there are schools that you might be looking at that back when you were applying weren't considered that good, but now are really amazing schools, or just with testing and things like that. And I think also it's just really important not to compare yourself. I don't know how much parents do this, but I know kids do this a lot. It's just comparing to other families, or just being like, they're doing this testing program, they're doing this extracurricular, and everyone really does have their own unique path and their own journey. And if one family seems like they have it all together, they probably don't.
Great advice. Allison.
I was going to say something and then Ella said it. So it's very different from when we were going through this process. If you went through this process when I did decades ago, it's different. You know, the internet's here now. You can research schools all over the place, and it's so much more global, and it's so much more competitive than when we went through it. So I think that's important to know, just in the back of your head, that this process is not going to look like the process. It looked nothing like the process that I went through way back in the day. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think another piece of advice that I heard that was actually really important was in terms of not overloading, finding a time, either it's dinner time or whatnot, where, okay, we're going to talk for a little bit about college, and then we're going to stop, and we're going to talk about life, and we're going to have other things, and it's not going to be our focus. So that there's space to, like, not, because I know that they're thinking about it all the time, right? It's your next step. You're going to be thinking about it way more than we are. So allowing some space for just life and other things to creep in, because it's going to happen. You're going to go through the process. There will be moments that are stressful. There'll be moments that are really fun. The visits were really fun. You've got your college counselors here who can help you and can be your sounding voice about what should I say, you know, or what's the right thing to do in this situation. And I would say, take your child's cues, and if they're not wanting to talk about it, then I think it's time to give them some space. If they want your advice, by all means, but I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're entering the process.
Thank you, Allison. And thanks all of our panelists for being with us this morning to just share your experiences and your perspectives. I hope it was really helpful. Mr. Almonte, Ms. Middleton, anything else to add before we wrap up?
Just thank you to the panelists and thank you to the audience members for joining us today and being a part of this program.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Seniors, enjoy the last week of school that you have. We'll see you all. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.